In 1939, New Zealand, like most other countries, was completely unprepared for a new global war. The experiences of the First World War have been taken to heart, and yet the lessons have been forgotten. The New Zealand Army was no further on than it had been in 1918. At least we could manufacture the then standard Mark 7 303 ammunition, and the CAC factory would go on to make 200 million rounds by 1945. On the eve of war, New Zealand finally received its modern munitions in the form of Bren carriers and Bren guns, and yet New Zealand soldiers entering camp for the first time would have been issued equipment and arms very similar and familiar to his father's generation 20 years earlier. The arm that he was issued was the bolt-action 303 Lee-Enfield rifle.
The Lee-Enfield was first used by the New Zealanders in the Boer War, the early version known locally as a long tom, which still equipped the Kiwis who landed at Gallipoli. It was used again in World War II as a reserve weapon, and reissued, like this example, to the Home Guard. The magazine contained 10 rounds. A magazine cutoff kept the magazine as a reserve, as each round had to be loaded individually.
By 1916, all the long toms had been retired from frontline service to be replaced by the SMLE, the short magazine Lee-Enfield. And this was a rifle that would prove itself in 2 world wars, being reliable in the frontline trenches of World War I, right through to the deserts of World War II. It was a robust, accurate and fast-firing weapon.
The SMLE was a practical battlefield rifle, issued with a long 18-inch bayonet to compensate for the weapon's reduced length. It had a fixed charger bridge so that 2 5-round stripper clips could quickly feed into the magazine. In the Mark III Star, the cutoff was omitted for wartime manufacture, as the magazine now became the primary method for feeding the rounds. The magazine, though detachable, remained with the rifle at all times. The SMLE's reputation for its reliable rate of fire was possible because the handle was in close reach of the trigger, the short bolt travel enabling the head to remain steady, and it cocked on closing, easing bolt manipulation. Its smooth action and speed demonstrated in Crete 1941 by Lieutenant Charles Upham, who, while suffering from dysentery and his wounded left arm in a sling, used an SMLE supported by a fork in a tree as he shot down at close range 2 approaching German paratroops in quick succession.
The rifle known as the P14 started its life as a contract rifle in America for the British Army. It used the 303 ammunition, but only had a 5-round capacity, and as such, it was relegated to a reserve weapon.
This P14 rifle used a modified Mortar bolt design, but angled the bolt handle to bring it closer to the trigger. The rifle was considered very accurate, but also less tolerant to dirt, and having an internal magazine that could only take 5 rounds relegated it as a training or reserve weapon. Refurbished prior to World War II, New Zealanders used many of them in Crete, presumably a temporary measure to replace their SMLEs lost in the earlier Greek campaign.
Between the wars, rifle categories were changed. The SMLE became the rifle number 1, rifle number 2 was the 22 training version, rifle number 3 was the P14, and number 4 would be the Lee-Enfield that would soon enter service in World War II.
The number 4 rifle was designed from the outset for mass production. With an adjustable aperture sight, a shorter spike bayonet and a heavier suspended barrel, it was manufactured in Britain, Canada and under contract arrangement in the USA. The number 4 rifle reached the front line from 1943, but New Zealand troops only ever used them in very limited numbers, most of them being the specially selected number 4T, the sniper variant. Though bolt-action rifles were designed for right-handed use, in World War II, snap shooting left and right-handed around cover was practiced.
Another weapon for the frontline infantry was this, a Mills bomb hand grenade, technically known as the 36M. They were manufactured all over the place, and this example is made by Mason and Porter, who would later go on to be the lawnmower company Massport.
It couldn't be simpler. A spring-loaded striker was held in place by a lever. When the pin was pulled out, the lever released, allowing the striker to hit a timed fuse, which would set off the baritol explosive filling. The serrations in the casing were primarily for grip. The Mills bomb was primed prior to battle with one of 2 time fuse detonators, either 4 or 7 seconds. The longer duration was used with a grenade cup attached to the rifle. With added gas check disc, the pin removed, grenade inserted and range set, a special blank ballistite cartridge launched the grenade up to 150 yards.
The infantry had another way of reaching out to the enemy. The 2-inch mortar could provide covering fire with either high explosive or smoke bombs fired out to 450 yards.
Early models had a base plate in sight. Later models omitted the sight, and later the base plate was deleted, leaving little more than a tube and a trigger. A painted white line replaced the sight, relying on the operator's experience to aim the mortar. The bomb slid down the tube and was fired by a click knob.
For anti-tank defences, New Zealanders were issued the 2-pounder, the 6-pounder and finally the 17-pounder anti-tank guns. The frontline infantry had more limited options, consisting of, from 1940, the Boys anti-tank rifle, or from 1943, the new weapon called a PEAT.
The Boys anti-tank rifle was a large caliber bolt-action rifle. 5 rounds of tungsten-tipped .55-inch armour-piercing ammunition were loaded into a detachable magazine. The gunner aimed through a sight offset to the left, took firm hold and prepared himself for a considerable recoil and concussion effect. The Boys became less and less effective against up-armoured German tanks, but still proved a useful weapon against light tanks and armoured cars. Boys were also used mounted in Bren carriers and carried by the long-range Desert Group. The PEAT, like the Boys, was issued 3 per company. Its unconventional look did not inspire confidence, but it was effective enough on even the thickest armour, providing the PEAT gunner was patient and courageous enough to wait for the tank to get within range. The PEAT was carried in action with its large spring already compressed. On firing, the spring thrust the firing rod forward into the hollow tail of the bomb, activating a small cartridge. This launched the bomb at the target and recocked the spring. The firing process produced significant recoil, but no telltale backblast. The PEAT was equally effective against bunkers, walls of buildings, or was able to fire on a high trajectory like a mortar.
The military authorities thought of the Thompson as something of a gangster gun, but they had to revise their decisions when they saw how the Germans used their MP-38 during the Blitzkrieg of 1940. New Zealanders were quickly issued the Thompson as soon as they entered Greece and used it later on in Crete, North Africa, Italy and in the Pacific.
The 1928 Thompson submachine gun, or machine carbine in British manuals, was first distributed with a drum magazine holding 50 .45 caliber rounds. But this magazine rattled, was slow to load, and added to an already heavy weapon, the 20-round box magazine being preferred. Issued to NCOs, a simplified version, the M1 was produced in such numbers in 1945 as to equip several men in each section. Troops using the Tommy gun, as it became known, were instructed to aim the whole body at the target and fire instinctively and aggressively. In 1943, 2nd Lieutenant Moana Nui Narimu of the Maori Battalion was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross in Tunisia when, in the fighting for Point 209, in close quarters charged at an enemy advance, firing his Tommy gun from the hip, leading his men forward in a successful counter-attack. The Lanchester was Britain's first attempt at creating a 9mm submachine gun. The Royal Navy and Royal Air Force needed a machine carbine as the Army had monopolised the Thompson. Directly copied from a German MP-28 design, the Lanchester was heavy and complex to make, but issued to Royal Naval ships and used by Royal New Zealand Navy boarding parties. The Sten gun was designed to be a much lighter, cheaper and easily made weapon. The gun itself was simple and efficient, but the 9mm magazines were prone to misfeeds if not handled with care. New Zealand alone manufactured 10,000 Stens, but apart from a handful that were issued to New Zealand tank crews in the Pacific Theatre, they were not generally distributed, most likely on account of the limited amount of 9mm ammunition then available in the country. Though that didn't seem to stop New Zealand troops serving with Fijian commandos in the Solomons acquiring a number of Australian Owen guns. 4.5 caliber ammunition used in the Thompson had more stopping power than 9mm, but both were still short-range weapons, primarily designed for closing with the enemy.
New Zealanders were issued the Smith & Wesson and Enfield revolvers. Both were chambered in .38 ammunition.
A pistol's main advantage is convenience and being able, through use of a holster, to keep hands free until needed. Useful for officers, tank crew, military police and other specialists. On issue were 38 caliber revolvers with a break-open ejector, as in the Webley, or more often its Enfield copy, or the Lend-Lease supplied Smith & Wesson with a swing-out chamber. Charles Upham put his revolver to good use along with a bag of grenades in stalking an enemy machine gun nest during the counterattacks at Malame Aerodrome in Crete.
Covering fire for the infantry was provided by the standard light machine gun, the Bren. 3 of them were issued per platoon, and each man was expected to carry 2 magazines, each carrying 30 rounds to supply it with ammunition.
This weapon was integral to unit tactics. The Bren could be used prone, standing, or mounted on a tripod. Key design features were the top-fitting magazine, sights being offset to the left, fully adjustable bipod, a carry handle mounted on the quick-change barrel, and high accuracy, which complemented standard Commonwealth infantry doctrine of aimed or suppressing fire, rather than as an area weapon. A safety catch also adjusted to single or auto fire. The gas return value was adjustable to assist a fouled action. The Bren section ideally consisted of 3 men: a gunner, loader and commander, usually a corporal or section 2 IC. Again, it was used by Charles Upham, who scaled a bluff behind the Sfakia evacuation beach, opened fire at a range of 500 yards and picked off 22 Germans, blunting their attack. At the Monte Cassino battles, acting Captain Walter Wordley of the Maori Battalion oversaw the placement of 4 Bren guns to cover a night reconnaissance patrol. The mission accomplished, his Bren teams then switched to firing tracer ammunition to guide the patrols back across the darkness of no man's land to safety. The American-designed, British-made Lewis gun was a light support machine gun of World War I vintage, but With a barrel shroud and a 47-round 303 Pan magazine, light was a relative term. The Lewis continued to see service on anti-aircraft mountings for vehicles, motor torpedo boats, and for defending airfields. Additionally, they were pressed back into service with home defence units early in the war.
The Vickers machine gun was considered the king of no man's land. It was tripod-mounted, water-cooled and belt-fed, and its ability to perform sustained fire was unmatched.
The Vickers fired Mark 8Z 303 caliber ammunition in canvas belts from a tripod or vehicle mount. The Vickers entered service in World War I and proved its value firing directly or in long-range plunging fire. It was to do so again in World War II. The weapon was operated by specialised troops placed on the front line as required. The Vickers could fire almost continuously, provided there was water and ammunition. Water poured into the barrel jacket kept the barrel cool, while the resulting steam condensed into a hose to be collected and reused. A decent pot of tea could be made from a belt or two of ammunition. Gunners became quite attached to these precision weapons. Jim Dempsey of the Carrier Platoon, 24th Battalion, recovered his machine gun and lugged it as his own personal firepower during the withdrawals in Greece, through evacuations and again into battles in North Africa.
When it comes to firepower, the queen of the battlefield is artillery, and New Zealanders were particularly well served with our own batteries of 25-pounder gun howitzers.
The 25-pounder was a versatile gun howitzer, able to fire smoke, high explosives or armour-piercing shells by line of sight and indirect angle. The gun had a rapid rate of fire, even though the charge and shell were separate. When ranging for a fire mission, forward observers would give prefixed commands for a stonk, all guns in range firing on a designated grid area, or murder, all guns firing at a single target. Even while on the move, a specialty of the Commonwealth artillery regiments was quickly bringing the 25-pounder into position. This meant that the 25-pounder could rapidly support troops in the front line to a distance of 9 miles. A muzzle brake was added in 1944, enabling even more powerful charges to be loaded.
The New Zealand Army drew most of its equipment and supplies from the British Army stores. But what made them different was the individuals behind them. New Zealand had started off with barely 600 full-time soldiers, but it ended the war with 105,000 men seeing overseas service. The amateurs had become professionals. These were the tools that were used to fight fascism, arms that are interwoven with our own stories of courage, initiative and determination.